Good afternoon. At this afternoon's Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast, we're very privileged to have Angus Laing, who's Executive Dean of Edinburgh Business School and School of Social Sciences at the Heriot-Watt University. Angus, thank you very much indeed for having this interview today.
My pleasure, Harry.
Can we start by you sharing your professional journey to where you are today, please?
I think I'm probably I'm almost an accidental academic leader. I started my career outside academia. I did several years working for a couple of global reinsurance companies, but then was seduced back into academia. I started my academic career at the University of Aberdeen, where I did my PhD, and I cultivated a decade and a half, pure academic career, very much focused on research around consumers and professional services, the impact of technology on professional service consumption. So I played the sort of classic straight academic bat, and enjoyed that, but progressively got sucked into leadership roles. One of the less desirable characteristics of academia is if you're reasonably competent to take on a management leadership role, you rapidly get drawn into that, and that's very much what happened to me. Having completed a number of very large research grants, I ended up being approached about a role as dean of the School of Business and Economics at Loughborough, where I was appointed to actually create the school, to integrate a number of separate parts: business, economics, information science, continuing education. And I really got the taste then for that academic leadership. I moved subsequently to Lancaster Management School, where I was faculty dean, thoroughly enjoyed that. And finally, 3 years ago, moved to Edinburgh Business School to take on a particular challenge of developing a school that was absolutely underperforming, but with some absolutely phenomenal assets in the form of online capability, a very large campus in Dubai, and the most wonderful asset in Panmure House, the final home of Adam Smith.
Interesting you say about some of those great positives that you possess. So, would you share what does the Edinburgh Business School and School of Social Sciences do really, really well and punch right above its weight?
I mean, it's a really good question, and a wider observation would be that the university sector generally, and business schools in particular, are not particularly good at differentiating themselves, at developing very clear positioning for themselves, tend to be fairly similar in what they do. This is one of the attractions of coming to Edinburgh Business School, was that it is unashamedly an institution that focuses on developing learners for practice. We focus on the development of talent. We focus on the development of knowledge at the absolute core of what we do, and that is particularly want to emphasize relevant knowledge. So if you trace Heriot-Watt University's history back, it goes all the way back to 1821, when it was effectively the first mechanics institute ever set up by a group of Edinburgh industrial leaders to provide the skills that were required for the industrial revolution, and which were in short supply. I think the key thing about Edinburgh Business School is the development that goes back to the late 1990s, of our capability around distance learning. What we've now referred to as online learning has really built on that history, built on that legacy. So it's authentic to the institutional DNA, if you like. And this reach delivering practice oriented, firmly practically anchored business education, making it available accessibly to those who can benefit from it, I think are real strengths we've got. So if I look at our being a bit technical, if I look at a key element of our capability, it is having a student management system that allows us to register students 365 days of the year. you talk to most of my peers in UK, US, European, and Australian business schools, and they would give their back teeth for a system that has that capability as we move into a world that requires more lifelong learning and the development of micro credentials, other short qualifications that suit lifelong learning. You need that core infrastructure. And so I think our superpower is the ability to deliver that strongly practical education across the globe. Of our 7,000 plus online learners we have at the moment, with an ambition to double that number by 2030, more than a quarter of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think we've got some really interesting capabilities. I'm really proud of what the school does on that front, but at the same time, run and lead really, really significant major UK research and innovation funded grants. We have £19 million from Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council to lead the work on the decarbonisation of UK transport infrastructure. So it's both that accessible education, but it's also that very applicable knowledge.
You are noted as having, and you mentioned it at the beginning of this interview, as having areas of interest in consumption of professional services in contemporary societies and the impact of technology on service delivery and consumption. Could you elaborate?
Oh, that sounds a bit pompous. It's a lot less. It's a lot less. It's a lot less pompous. It's a lot less pompous than that. It's very much. I've been fascinated by the way in which consumers who have limited expertise, traditionally limited access to information, make decisions about which lawyer to use, which healthcare provider to go to, should they have choices about education. All these areas, professional services present a particular set of challenges to consumers, and I've been fascinated by that. I can trace some of that back way to the early 2000s. When working with a colleague, I was going through the British Medical Journal and the letters pages and seeing GPs complaining about people bringing into internet printouts to the consultation. A colleague was going through a number of magazines such as Good Housekeeping, where the letters pages were filled with people complaining that the GP was dismissing the information they had printed off and were bringing along to the consultation. And I thought it was a wonderful example of some of the challenges and tensions we were starting to see as the information revolution in those early days started to build through. And if we look in the AI-driven world we're starting to confront now, this whole issue, we're talking about professional services very much being changed by AI. Absolutely, they will. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's also really interesting questions to be explored as to how AI might change consumers' behavior, might enable consumers to be, if you like, more informed, better consumers. And then what does that in turn mean for the professional service organizations delivering those services? So it's just because you've got a high level of complexity. It's not like buying a Mars bar. It's that complexity gives it a richness, and there are fascinating questions ranging from issues of trust on the one hand, all the way through to efficiency of delivery accessibility. So yeah, I would consider it a fascinating area, and I'm doing my utmost here, Harry, not to start to go on to a bit of a monologue and a lecture.
No, you're fine. So, what challenges and opportunities do business schools face, such as the one you lead today?
Wow.
Oh,
Where
are
to,
we going to be here for 3 or 4 days?
I will endeavor to keep it. I will never keep it concise, because many people, many of us are well aware, only too well aware of the challenges facing the higher education sector, whether it's in the UK or the US. There are multiple factors impacting on it. I'll talk about those in a second, but I think I would start with a much more fundamental, almost an existential question, which is, what is the purpose of a university? What's the purpose of a business school? What is it do? There's questions I would suggest being asked. I wouldn't say they're not legitimate questions to be asking around the relevance of universities, our credibility, given issues around fees, student debt, um, political agendas, perceived political biases. So there's a whole set, I think there's a big cluster around the questions of relevance and legitimacy that will take time for the sector to wrestle through. More pragmatically, much more operationally, we have a vast array of issues around level of competition. If you look at the development of the university sector globally, you're seeing countries such as China, increasingly also India, really developing their university sectors, and those sectors now being in competition with, being competitors to the established European, American, British universities. So markets that used to supply us with students are now actually competing for students with us. That's a really different dynamic. We've then this in the UK context in particular, the visa regime plus the funding regime for universities is creating huge challenges. Fundamentally, UK universities are financially unsustainable were it not for large numbers of international students coming in. If you take visa regime change linked to concerns about migration and the rise of competitor nations delivering university education, that international student flow is shrinking and shrinking quite rapidly. The pressure you're seeing on universities across the UK, from just up the road from where I am in Dundee, through Nottingham, Cardiff, you pretty much name any of the home nations. And we have institutions that are facing really severe difficulties because the income we get for teaching UK students barely covers the cost in England, and in Scotland, it doesn't even cover three-quarters of the cost. So you have to have income that offsets it, compounded by the fact that research grants typically pay 75, sorry, to 80% of full economic costs, which means you have big research grants which concentrate on those institutions, I would argue, that are really important to the UK around STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths, are some of the institutions most exposed to financial pressures. So we've got a real set of challenges. However, having said that, I remain an optimist. We're in a world that needs lifelong learning. Our problem is have found ourselves in most institutions, and I want to accept Heriot-Watt Edinburgh Business School from this. We found ourselves trapped with a model that is around a big block of 3-4 year education right up front for 18-year-olds. Yeah, there's still a degree of validity in that, unequivocally a degree of validity in that. But the real need, the real growth, is going to be coming in that continual lifelong learning. And the question, I think in a sense, we've gone and emphasized form over function, and that function for learning now is not an upfront block. It needs to be through people's lives, through people's careers. But our infrastructure, our culture, our systems are simply not set up for that in the majority of institutions. So there's an opportunity, but it's going to pose a challenge. Institutions are going to have to pivot, and we know universities have got many merits, but the ability to be agile is, I would argue, not one of them. And the last thing I'll just say is I think there is a real opportunity with AI in particular starting to sweep through the sector to really revisit the business model we've got. We have unequivocally, I would argue, got a relatively high cost business model. Can we find other ways of delivering university level education more efficiently? I think the answer is yes. We need to be brave enough to grasp it. And one of the challenges I think we have in the UK is I'm not convinced at the moment, and for the last decade, we actually have been brave enough to step into the challenges that we actually face in the economy and society.
So, Angus, how do you best prepare your students? I suppose it's a continuation of what we've just been talking about. In this fast changing world of AI and technology, how do you prepare them for the world at work? And how, it's changing so quickly. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think the very point about the change is both drives it makes this particularly important, but also creates a whole set of problems. The moment you try and teach people around particular technologies or particular angles, you're on a hiding to nothing because 5 years' time that technology is going to be out of date. So it's much more about providing the fundamentals. Yes, you are going to be exposing the students to AI. You're going to be exposing them to things like blockchain. You're going to be exposing them to all of that, but it is much more in the case of giving them an understanding of the broad technologies, what they can do, what the issues are, where the ethical issues, etc., might be, and enabling them, giving them an ability to understand the fundamentals. But then the critical bit, I would also argue, is that they have the skills, the ability to be able to change, to be able to adapt. So these are agile, nimble employees or entrepreneurs for the future. So we have to make sure that the agenda items, whether it's AI and technological innovation, whether it's sustainability, be that in relation to biodiversity, climate change, whatever, we need to be in a position that the students have a robust understanding of that, not about necessarily about the specific elements, and then how we ensure that they're capable of thriving in rapidly changing environments and leading, working in organizations in rapidly changing environments. Final thought there is it's actually the value of working with our colleagues in those STEM disciplines. So you bring them in, you get the injection at Heriot. What we have a thing called the National Robotarium, which is one of the major centres for developing the application of robotics into industry. That reflects our STEM background. But the value is being able to pull in academics and practitioners from the Robotarium to talk to our students, giving them that awareness. So I think that cross-disciplinary, that interdisciplinary element is really important.
Am I right? You've brought together the business school with the reshaped design school, correct?
Yes.
And would you tell us about that?
I think this is really it builds on the previous point. AI is changing the world out of all recognition, and one of the key elements, and typically in services, and one of the key things in services are around service design. How do you design the service process? How do you design the services in a way that work for consumers, that build services we talked about already, areas where cognitively challenging. Trust is really important. How do you design services? So bringing it was a relatively small design school with a strong focus on industrial design in textiles and other industries, but bringing it into the business school and giving it alongside the business school, bringing it alongside the business school, giving it a broader remit into services as well as industrial design. I think allows us to create both business programs that are distinctive in having that cutting edge design thinking in it, but also taking the business skills and developing those amongst the design students, because a lot of the students you get going into design school, they're interested in design. That's fine. Part of the challenge is, and that's what we want, but there's a danger that this sits in a sort of bubble, an isolated bubble, as opposed to necessarily coming out as graduates who really understand, yes, design, but design in its place in business, design in its place in organizations, in services. So it's bringing the two together. We see some good examples in mainland Europe of institutions that bring, typically technological universities, that bring together design and business into a really creative nexus. It's not just about ensuring that we've got programs that are globally competitive, but it's actually really fundamentally making a difference in businesses in the UK and internationally.
Last question for today, Angus. Please tell me about the value of accreditation for business schools.
Now, if you really wanted a topic that could take up a long time, that would be it. I will endeavour to. Right. So
Yeah.
there's a right. I think accreditation has quite significant value. Let me explain. That it is about being able to demonstrate best practice in your business school by benchmarking yourself against global standards. Now, I am particularly positive about initial accreditation, the first time you go through an accreditation process. And there's two major accrediting bodies. There's the American Association for the Advancement of Collegiate Schools of Business and the European Quality Improvement System. Now, your good business schools will have both of those. Going through them for the first time is hugely valuable, particularly if you align it with your strategic development, the developmental journey that you are on, which is very much what we're doing at Edinburgh Business School at the moment. I have experience at Lancaster and Loughborough, where when you're on your third reaccreditation cycle, you do have colleagues, I think, legitimately asking questions about the value of it. The value is less than in that initial accreditation, but it is about keeping you current, making sure there is no slippage in your practice. So I'm a strong advocate of accreditation, but I think we need to recognise that there are costs associated with it, and it's not necessarily right for every business school. It really is not necessarily right for every business school. I think you need to look at certain players, particularly players operating in very local markets. It may not be the most important thing for them, and you will have some colleagues who would argue that the criteria, the standards that are imposed do and can limit business schools and what they do. They push them all into. I come back almost to the point I made in my first response, Harry, which is we don't get enough differentiation in business schools, and there will be a number of colleagues who would argue that accreditation creates a degree of isomorphism, pushes them together. I dispute that because I think there's enough space in the accreditation frameworks to allow differentiation, but I can understand where it comes from. So, on balance, absolutely accreditation is valuable, but one needs to consider it. One needs to consider it carefully, and I think it does provide good indicators to students about the robustness of the education that is provided by that particular school.
Angus Laing, Executive Dean of Edinburgh Business School, thank you so much indeed for your time today. It's been a great privilege to have you here today. Thank you.
No, Harry, pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.